Hi, welcome back to Frank's Final Review. We decided to take a week off last week due to a holiday here in the United States, Thanksgiving. But we're back this week, and to kind of make up for some lost time, we are going to be reviewing a 4 LP box set. And this is from the band Phish, their LP titled A Live One. This was Phish's 6th album. They had recorded 5 studio albums up until this point, and their growth had been pretty exponential leading up to this album, and would continue. Their popularity would continue to surge, really on the heels of this album. So we're going to talk about this album today. This album was released back in on the 28th of June in 1995. Essentially, most of the tracks on this album were recorded from Phish's fall 1994 tour, and the tour was recorded by their sound engineer Paul Languedoc, who coincidentally makes Trey's, at that time, made Trey's guitar and Mike's bass, and continues to make guitars for Trey. I'm sure he probably does for Mike as well, but Trey's guitars are definitely associated with Paul. Just beautiful. Paul's an incredible luthier. Just beautiful work. And so Phish fans know the relationship with Paul and the band and their instruments. So anyway, getting back to the album, just a great album. We're going to break it down track by track, and this is how the tracks sort of lay out. It's spread across 4 LPs. And I've got a better graphic here. This is from the inside sleeve, the booklet, if you will, showing how the tracks are laid out. So we're going to talk about each track. We're going to talk about where the tracks were recorded. Just to touch base on the fall 1994 tour. That tour was characterized by Phish playing in small theaters. They hadn't graduated to larger venues, but they were playing larger venues here and there, culminating in their first appearance at Madison Square Garden on December 30th of 1994. That was their debut at the Garden, a sellout crowd, and really sort of a great way to end the year. 1994 was a huge year for Phish. So this album really captures that fall tour wonderfully. So let's just jump right into it. The album starts off, and if Phish ever had a top 40 hit, and they're just not that kind of band. They don't play for the radio. They although they're very popular, they are sort of a cult thing in terms of like you either really like them or you don't really like them at all. That's the feedback that I get from people over the years. But this song, and I just want to mention this, Bouncing Around the Room, the album opens with this song. And so it did get some airplay that summer when the album came out. And even for my friends who are not into music, or, they mention that if I mention Phish, or just it's sort of it's a non-Phish fan favorite song, if you will. Okay, so anyway, this version comes from December 31st, 1994, last show of the year, where they played at Boston Garden for their New Year's performance. This was a 3-set affair, so it's kind of cool. They open this new live album with this song. So we hear some really strong bass openings from Mike, which is really appropriate. This is kind of his hometown. Phish has always had a strong following in Boston and Massachusetts and New England. Coming from Burlington, they've always been a strong New England band, if you will. But obviously, Mike growing up in nearby Sudbury, this is a hometown show for him. Probably his folks were backstage. Just a real celebratory feel. So a lot of fans know the song and enjoy it. It came off the album Lawn Boy, their second album. And I really like this one. It's got some really cool alternating vocals, which kind of add to the bouncing idea. And I Awoke with Nighttime Again. And then Trey Anastasio, the guitar player for Phish, plays a beautiful arpeggio. And then he takes it up an octave, which kind of brings it a little more dramatic feel to it. Again, just a great way to kick it off. And then from there, we go into a song called Stash. And Phish fans out there know this song very well. This song on the album is the only song that wasn't culled from the Fall '95 tour. This one actually came from their Summer 1994 tour. But it's a great version. I mean, I can see why they wanted to include it. So the actual date from Stash is July 8th, 1994. And there is footage of this version on YouTube. I highly recommend it. It's a great video. And it's from the same show where Phish played their Gamehenge, Trey's senior thesis Gamehenge. They played that in the first set. And that also is available on live on YouTube. So I highly recommend viewing that as well. So getting back to Stash, we hear some crowd clapping in between sections. There's that classic band audience symbiosis, which is really cool. Mike's pretty quiet behind Trey in the first verse, but things quickly crank up during the chanting segment. And there was a break that kind of reminded me of Manteca. It kind of sounded like that, and it comes from the same album, Picture of Nectar. So there's definitely some of that Manteca sort of Dizzy Gillespie type feel, if you will. I mean, Trey has a great tone here on his Languedoc guitar. Mike as well. Mike is sounding great. They go into the lyrics. The soul of garlic starts to rot. Maybe so, maybe not. Fishman's chiming in with more cymbals, and then Trey starts to lead into the jam. The jam really opens up after Page, the piano player, his last vocal refrain, maybe so, maybe not. Fishman's very much thrashing on his cymbals. The jam continues to open up, and it's really interesting. It sounds very futuristic here, right? And Phish is known for their listening exercises. They would have these exercises called Listening to Your Own Hay, where they practice improvisation, and you can get that sense here that they're have really sort of perfected that exercise, and it's appearing here in a lot of their music. They're clearly listening to each other. The music's ebbing and flowing. Great Phish and Mike Gordon, the bass player, John Fishman, the drummer. Trey signals a return to the tonic, but then there's a few more forays into dissonance because this song is really defined by tension and release. So Trey's still sort of in that tension phase, if you will. You can really hear Paige McConnell on the piano playing really intently towards the end. And then Trey, the Jedi master of tension and release. And this really was their signature sound in '94. You just hear these really long tension and release jams like we hear here. This was before they got into funk and ambient, and in the early to mid '90s through the end of that decade, Phish had evolved into 3 or 4 different styles of their jamming. Became very distinct. I don't want to digress too far on that. So then we hear the cool extended Maybe So, Maybe Not, and again there's more tension. You can hear Fishman doing some really solid rolls, and then Trey finally goes back to the main theme. It's just a great version, and again I highly recommend the YouTube version. And then right on the heels of that, we get a song called Gumbo, and this is a new song that hadn't appeared on a Phish album up until this point. And it's kind of interesting, I listened to this record last weekend, even though we took the weekend off, 4 LPs, so I kind of took my time listening. And this came on the heels, Live Phish, if you follow Phish. Live Phish just released on their Live Phish series a show from November 14th, 1997, which features one of my favorite versions of Gumbo, really funky and just a great version. So I recommend downloading that. or streaming it. But we got a great version here, and here we hear playing with Phish. Towards the end of the song, we hear the cosmic country horns, and those are Dave Grippo on alto sax, Carl Gerhardt on trumpet, Michael Ray on trumpet as well, James Harvey on trombone, and Peter Affelbaum on baritone and alto sax, as well as flute. Interestingly, Michael Ray and James Harvey will appear on Trey's Sun Ra-inspired free jazz project Surrender to the Air. They recorded that in 1995, almost around a similar period as when this album came out, after the fall tour. It came out in June 95. So here they're playing with Phish. And having mentioned Surrender to the Air, I can probably speak for a lot of Phish fans out there. Yeah, we would love to see a vinyl release of Surrender to the Air. I mean, it's not really easy listening music per se, but it's just a really kind of an interesting slice in the work of Trey Anastasio and his friends. So that we would love to hear that on vinyl. I still have my original cassette of Surrender to the Air that I ordered off the Doniak Chavais, the Phish newsletter back in the day. So I definitely love that. As I sit here today and talk to you guys, I mean, today's the 29th year anniversary. It was recorded on December 2nd, 1994. So happy anniversary to Gumbo. And, I just mentioned the Cosmic Country Horns. Different members have been playing with Phish over the years, even going back to their 1991 Horns tour. I think Grippo was on that tour. But we hear these guys, we hear the horn players 4 songs earlier in this particular set, the second set from 12/2/94. They come out during the outro jam of David Bowie. So it's real. I recommend yet another version, a great version of David Bowie from December 2nd, 1994. So getting back to Gumbo, I know I've kind of jumped off the tracks here, which happens a lot with Phish. We hear some really nice organ by Page. He sounds great on the organ here, and it's just the perfect horn song. To me, it's like an ode to the Big Easy. Phish played a lot in New Orleans over the years. Even musically, it's sort of got that Gumbo feel, if you will. You can hear Fishman on the ride. He sounds great. The horns come back in for the outro solo, and Trey drops into a really great solo, kind of bluesy here, and just really tasty. He does some really nice bending, and he's got some great vibrato and sustain. Just a really great solo. One of my favorite versions of Gumbo for his guitar work. Eventually the band drops out and it's just the horns, and it's just kind of, again, adds to that New Orleans feel. Really, really cool. So I definitely like that. Okay, so at this point, the record segues into, and here's another new track, and this is song 3, and this is called Montana, and we are we're on side B. We're on side B, end of LP1, and again going back, we're on the song called Montana, and it's kind of, I like how they mix this. They went from Gumbo to Montana. So Montana starts, John Fishman's leading it off with his snare and kick drum, kind of an ominous feel. Page is playing some eerie notes on his piano. It's kind of just eerie. You can hear Trey doing some kind of volume swells with his guitar. You hear some crowd whistling. This was recorded in Bozeman, Montana. This was recorded on November 28th of 1994. Fishman has almost sort of a military style in his drumming here. It's almost like rudiments, but he's definitely adding some flair. The jam kind of gets a little muddy, and then we hear crowd noise, and then we go into the next track, You Enjoy Myself. And I wanted to mention, on the CD there is no audience, there is no crowd noise. On the LP it ends side 1. On the CD, it goes right in at the end of Montana. It goes right into the intro of You Enjoy Myself. But just wanted to mention that Montana It is a short snippet of that, of the November 28th, 1994 Tweezer, which is I think it's 44 minutes long, that version. So this is like a 2 or 3 minute snippet from that, but a great version. It's available on Live Phish. I recommend, downloading or streaming that show. And even if you want to just focus on the Tweezer, Phish played three monster versions of Tweezer that fall. They played one in November 2nd, 1994 in Bangor, Maine, which is actually on this album, a live one. This one, the November 28th, 1994 Bozeman version, and then another really tentpole version that I feel is a tentpole version from December 9th, 1994, and those three versions, and then there were some other great versions on that tour. 11/23/94, for example, 12/1/94. But those three in particular, 11/2, 11/28, and 12/9, these are the masterpieces from fall '94. So Montana comes from Tweezer. So moving on to LP2, here we have You Enjoy Myself. And this is probably I've heard Trey say this in interviews, that this is sort of the signature Phish song, the pinnacle of Phish, if you will. And I agree. I mean, I remember the first time hearing this song, I was blown away. So this song on this album comes from December 7th, 1994, in San Diego. And like I mentioned, this song converted many a fan, including me. And one of my first bootlegs was May 26, 1994, the second set. I had that show on cassette from the Warfield in San Francisco. Just a great version of You Enjoy Myself. I listened to that for hours. Just a great version. So here, the intro is very magical. Again, probably the ultimate Phish song next to Divided Sky. The beautiful Nirvana section, it sounds like underwater music. It really sort of personifies the band, their name, which Phish coincidentally was named after the drummer, John Fishman. But their music at its best really sort of evokes, water imagery and sort of aquatic sounds, if you will. And they definitely capture that here in the Nirvana section. Mike is playing some pretty trippy bass. He's got some echo, and it sounds really nice. Fishman's on his ride. There's some subtle tension before Page and Trey unify back into the next section, led by Fishman's woodblock. Just some great ensemble playing by everyone here. One of my good friends from college, she was telling me how they thought that You Enjoy Myself, we went to college in the state of Maine, and she said that, You Enjoy Myself was a reflection of the Androscoggin River from the headwaters all the way down to its release into the Gulf of Maine. The different changes that You Enjoy Myself has. And I think that's something that we all sort of, recognized in that song, that there were all these changes. So that was pretty interesting. But it's kind of a cool analogy, thinking about the transformation from headwaters, to serene. The river might sort of pool out, if you will, into sort of an oasis. And so it's really a great analogy. I just like that. So I wanted to mention that here. We hear some more changes. There's a 2-chord transition. Trey's playing great rhythm guitar, as he always does. Trey is just a great rhythm guitar player and lead guitar player. He's definitely got it all. Trey and Mike fly into Trey's guitar solo. Wonderful peaks by Trey. Again, he's just so on in '94. He's playing incredible at every show. It's just incredible. Trey comes screaming in, and then they go into the only lyrics in the song: boy, man, God, and then shit. And I, as a young college student, these Zen-like lyrics were perfect, right? It was like, wow, this is weird. As the music's progressing, I think it starts on a B and just, races all the way up the fretboard. But it's a really nice sort of crescendo into the jam, the 2-chord jam. Eventually, they end up singing the lyrics, "What you feezy, drive me to Firenze," which I think the lyrics they're trying to say, "Would you please, won't you please drive us to Firenze?" Trey and Fishman in the summer of '85 had been playing street music in Europe that summer, and they met a cab driver, a taxi driver, and they were either on their way to Florence or they were in from Florence. But they asked him for a ride to Firenze. I think Firenze is Florence in Italian. And then the cab driver, they all became good friends. And at one point they were having a good time, and the cab driver exclaimed, "I'm so happy with you guys. You enjoy myself." And so that's how that's sort of the title came out. Just kind of a funny story there. There's some nice funk guitar by Trey. Page solos first on his organ. And this is during the Tramp segment where Trey and Mike are jumping on their small trampolines. If you've ever seen Phish live, they do this cool thing where they're on small trampolines during this sort of where Page is playing on the organ. And then Trey comes in with his chords, and Mike sounds very boppy here. Trey leads in with strong support from Fishman. Nothing too crazy, almost kind of a quiet jam. And I just wanted to mention, when I first got into Phish, that's the other thing I liked about them is that, coming from a sort of a rock culture, it's always loud, but these guys could really bring it down and create these quiet moments at their shows and in their music, which is pretty cool. I mean, there's a lot to be said about that. So they kind of get into that a little bit here. Trey's still chording a little bit instead of playing, crazy lead guitars and stuff, but he starts to pick it up, and then Mike's pretty solid here. This version of You Enjoy Myself was the 13th version out of 15 they played on that tour. So it's so crisp. I mean, they were so like as one, right? They're just so dialed in. There's great group play. Trey's intensity is picking up, and then he plays some really nice ascending lines. Page is really raging on the organ. And then Trey peaks it, and then there's sort of a siren-esque effect, almost like what we hear at the beginning of that Gamehenge set that I mentioned earlier. He was using that a lot in 1994. And then they transition into what's known as the bass and drums, where it's just Mike and Fishman playing with each other, playing off each other. Mike very much on the attack here. Fishman right there with him as well. I mean, I've heard some incredible versions of bass and drums in different versions. We hear more of the "What You Feezy Me, Drive Me to Firenze," sort of the pre-vocal jam, if you will. You can hear the audience is clapping, and then we go into a sort of a vocal jam where they improvise. They go from bass and drums to the vocal refrain of "What You Please Me, Drive Me to Firenze." I kind of messed that up, and then they go into a vocal jam, and they're just improvising. They all have mics, and they're improvising. They're chanting and harmonizing and doing some kind of interesting things, and that's how the song ends. And then you can hear Trey say, "Thanks a lot, everybody." Just a great version. I mean, I've heard this version probably over 50 times, if not 100. It's just it's ingrained in me at this point. But a great place to start if you've never heard of Phish, you can probably find this version on YouTube. But I recommend any version of You Enjoy Myself. But I recommend earlier versions, especially a live one version if you can find it. That's a great place to begin. It's just a beautiful piece of music and a great composition by Trey. On side 2, LP 2, I'm sorry, and on side D, and this leads off with "Chalk Dust Torture," another song like Stash off "Picture of Nectar." This is really just as a college student. I mean, I was in college when I got into Phish, but this song really resonated as a young college student. "Can I Live When I'm Young?" That's sort of the vocals. It's just got a really cool rock, sort of a classic rock riff, if you will. I know Mike, and there's a book called The Phish Book, and Mike talks about his love for this song. I mean, Phish is very experimental, but Mike talks about just how this is a sort of a go-ahead rock song, and it's important to have those songs, even if you are an experimental psychedelic rock band. It's nice to have some footing, if you will, and that's what Chalk Dust Torture is. Classic. Again, Mike is just really on it early on. There's some vocal shenanigans by Phish on the drums. So if Fishman's yelling out stuff, he's having fun. He's pumped. Page is also playing great, and this version comes from November 16th, 1994. And there's just an incredible version of Simple from that show that I highly recommend. Hasn't been released. Soundboard, a version did appear, I think, on when they had one of their festivals. It may have been from 2018, a festival that was canceled, but they still did from the archives, and I believe that the Simple from November 16th, 1994 circulates from that, from the archive. So I just highly recommend it if you can get your hands on it. But the Chalk Dust Torture comes from that same show. So they were just playing off the charts. We hear Trey, great early solo by Trey. Again, Fishman is howling underneath. I mean, Fishman is just, he's so pumped in this version. Everyone's playing great. Trey's ripping it up. He's continuing to literally assault his fretboard. He's got some nice bends. Mike is pounding away on his Languedoc. Mike Gordon, the bass player, he plays a custom Languedoc bass on this tour and album. Trey hits some really cool arpeggios to end it. And then there's some, which is kind of unique about this song, there's some cool unison lines as they end it before they do the chorus reprise. And just to give you an idea of this song, there is a great version from December 30th, 1994, which was recorded in the afternoon before their debut at Madison Square Garden. They were on the David Letterman show. That was their debut at David Letterman. But check out that version because it's a little, it's sort of an abbreviated version compared to what we hear here, but it gives you an idea of what they sound like, and it's a great version. So definitely check that out. The next song is Slave to the Traffic Light. And, this is the way that the album is laid out between, so Slave to the Traffic Light sort of ends set one and sort of, we have set one ending, beginning with Bouncing Around the Room, and then set one ends with Slave, if you will. The way that Phish constructed You Enjoy Myself, obviously they were trying to put almost like a two-set show together. So here we are at the end of set one with Slave to the Traffic Light. And this is a new song. Again, it hadn't appeared on an album until now on You Enjoy on a live one. This version of Slave to the Traffic Light is from November 26, 1994. This one's got a reggae style beginning. There's some nice mic early on. Both he and Trey, they end on some harmonic notes. It definitely has some island vibes. See the city, see the zoo, traffic light won't let me through. Just really simplistic lyrics. It's all about the music. There's a break with some great Fishmen. There's a little bit of a tension section. Almost, if you're familiar with Phish and you know Harry Hood, Fishman sounds like he's drumming in that sort of Harry Hood style a little bit. Trey and Mike are very subtly playing off each other. Trey's chording with Mike actually leading the jam. And, I remember hearing this for the first time and thinking, wow, it's cool to hear the bass player actually leading the jam. I just remember the first time I heard this version way back in 95. I was really impressed. I could hear Mike just kind of taking it, if you will. So that first impression has always stayed with me with Mike on this song. The jam opens, Trey's chording and doing a little bit of trilling. You can hear Page comping on the piano. The chord progression here is A, G, D, E, and it's kind of a slow, deliberate thing. It's more of a Zen longer piece, if you will. We'll talk about it here. Trey he's mostly chording before hitting a few lines, and again, it's just there's some great ensemble playing here. They're playing, they're listening. They're in the AGDE framework, if you will, but they're listening to each other, adding color and taking it slow. Again, Mike very much right there with Trey, and then to Trey. Trey descends into some arpeggio picking, and he follows that up with some pretty screaming guitar. Actually, crowd loves it. Trey says something underneath, and then Paige says, "We're going to take a very short break. Please don't go anywhere." And so that ends the set, as I was saying. And I just wanted to mention, great version, by the way. I just wanted to mention that this version comes from November 26, 1994. And there's a tremendous version of David Bowie from that show that I'd recommend. So literally almost every song on a live one, it's pulled from a live show. There is probably one or two corresponding like tentpole jams or something amazing that happened at that show, apart from the show, the track that they pick for the live album. So I'm mentioning these as we go through, just to give you, the listener, an opportunity to, check out some of their other music. Every version I'm recommending is highly recommended, and you will hear some great Phish music, probably Phish at their best, frankly. Okay, now moving on to set 2 of this album. So now we're on LP3, and so side 2. Set 2, if you will, opens with Wilson. And even before, so Wilson comes from December 30th, 1994, and that was their Madison Square Garden debut. So this ties into that Chalk Dust version I just mentioned. This was recorded later on that night. Their first time playing Madison Square Garden, and I remember hearing even Trey's dad, who was, very supportive of Trey and the band, but it was like Trey's dad sort of had a zenith moment when he saw Phish's logo and that they had sold out on the marquee at Madison Square Garden. Like, that sort of cemented the idea that, that Trey's dad knew that Phish was going to become something big, or that they had become something big. And so that was just kind of a cool little anecdote about that particular night. And we hear, before they start playing, you can hear Miles Davis, from the album Jack Johnson. You can hear the music. It's right off that great fusion track. So that's the walk-in music, if you will. Phish walks on stage to Right Off from Jack Johnson. So they go right into Wilson. This is and at the show, this was the debut. This was the opening second set. So again, just a great pick here. This is their debut to a packed Madison Square Garden. Again, another new song like Slave and Montana from the first set. This song hadn't appeared on an album. This comes from Trey's thesis. Trey wrote a thesis called Gamehenge when he was a senior at Goddard College, and this is a track from that. This is song number 3 in Trey's thesis, if you will. Really thumping mic early on. He was pumped, and I was so impressed with the sound. The mix sounds so great on this record set. It's just the depth and clarity, and you can really hear it on this song. I love the lyric, "Can you still have any fun now, Wilson?" Because essentially, what in the story of Gamehenge, Wilson is an evil king, and they're trying to overthrow him and restore balance and order in Gamehenge. So the lyric, "Can you still have any fun now, Wilson?" In the context of that, it's kind of funny. And then there's like an ascending wall of Phish space, if you will. There's some loopy effects. And this is right before the Blatt Bloom lyric with Trey's outro solo, where he does some nice bends and finishing touches, and then they slam into the next song. And this song is a song called Tweezer, again off Picture of Nectar. And this particular version is from November 2nd, 1994, from Bangor, Maine, at the Bangor Auditorium. This show, this version in this show was just an absolute barn burner. This is the show, and that show opened with a Halley's Comet into Tweezer. This is the show that got me hooked, line, and sinker as a Phish fan. I was definitely into their music going back to early '94 with my friend who played, gave me some tapes, but when I heard this Bangor second set, it just, it was epiphanous. I felt like I had discovered a new band, and the music was so inspiring and just great. So we hear some nice breaks with Page early on, and you can hear he's on his clavinet, which really is a signature sound of Phish in 1994. In some of those other jams that I mentioned, you'll hear Page on his clavinet. It's a big part of what they were doing that tour and that year. The crowd loves it as they head into the jam, and there's just some beautiful chromatic lines where Trey opens this version, and Phish is playing great, and it's just really, really pretty open to begin. Trey's creating some beautiful stuff early on. Page is responding. Mike is really patient. He's right there. He's picking up on some of Trey's chromatic ideas. There's almost a dreamy feel here. We're still early in the jam, but they're still just in a really nice space. Trey hits some higher runs. He's still kind of chunking away chromatically. And here's where it gets really good. The music just sort of opens up, right? It's like they're stepping into this portal. They're clearly listening to each other. The music, envelops them. They continue. Trey is very subtly building tension. I mean, this is beautiful music. They're improvising, right? So it's like you hear it for 30 seconds, and then it starts to change and morph and sort of decay, if you will. And that's what happens in improvisational music. Trey's kind of building tension. He goes back to some more ethereal lines. Just some really, really great stuff. Like I mentioned, Nothing Gold Can Stay, and the music turns kind of dark and almost sort of robotic, with sort of a hard psychedelic edge, if you will. And they continue that vibe for a while. Things are pretty raw here. They continue that vibe for a while. The music's pretty raw here. They're just laying it all out. This is like them in one of their practice spaces. There's some dissonant effects by Trey. It almost sounds like loud breathing, like that's the, and again, we hear these sort of video game sounds with loud breathing. Mike and Fishman continue to propel, and then the record kind of fades out, and then flipping the record over, picking up on sides 2, we're still in that sort of 1994, the free dissonant style, if you will. Fishman's like signaling he wants to get out of it. You can hear him doing some rolls and flourishes. Trey does some trilling, and he's still playing some kind of scary effects. I mean, the music at this point is kind of scary and frightening. They had played Halloween 2 nights prior on December 31st of 94 when they covered the Beatles' White Album. But clearly, Trey is still feeling it from Halloween, because this music is very dark and very scary. And I remember this day in particular because I was a student at a nearby university, and some friends invited me to the show. It was a really cold, rainy Tuesday or Thursday, and I didn't go to the show. I just wanted to go back to my room and play guitar. I was playing a lot of guitar myself at the time. But the thought of going out into a cold, rainy night just didn't really appeal to me that night. But those were the conditions, right? It was a cold, windy, rainy night in Bangor, Maine when Phish played this music. Mike and Phish, they finally lock into a groove and they run with it. Trey responds with some bends. There's some more industrial sounds. Page is responding on his piano. And then we actually hear some chanting. It sounds like Trey and Phish are chanting a little bit, which kind of adds to the weirdness, if you will. And Trey hits almost like a Black Sabbath sounding line on his guitar. And this just sort of heavier vibe continues. Mike and Page are playing some real heavy stuff, and then there's a sort of a breakdown. Fishman's responding here. There's some more dissonant effects from Trey, and then finally Fishman just takes the reins, and then Mike jumps on, and they just kind of run with it again, if you will. Trey still is implementing effects, and he's just not, for whatever reason, he's just in that mode, if you will. Some of the effects he's using, they're sort of oscillating up and down, and they're just sort of larger volume swells, if you will. Mike's playing some really good stuff, and him and Fishman, they're just, again, locked in. Page is laying it all out on the piano. And there's a version of Son of a Mule from this show, from set one. It's one of my favorite versions of Son of a Mule because Page's solo is just amazing. So definitely recommend that. So after Page, there's some quiet noodling, and Mike wants to play. There, again, there's that sort of mule duel feel, if you will. And then almost a funk jam emerges. Page is there. Trey starts this almost cartoon sounding line, and they all kind of jump on board, and that cartoon jam continues for a little bit. Trey hits some dissonant chords. Fishman picks up on it, and then they morph into another high energy jam. Mike relents, and perhaps he was listening for a point to jump back in. And at this point, Trey is just, liquid Trey with some really nice bends. And, Mike is absolutely killing it here as well. Page, they're all killing it. You can hear them kind of getting back into the Tweezer theme. We know we're kind of at the end. Page is back on the clavinet, and things are a little more playful here. They've just covered 28, 29. Not including the head of Tweezer, which is 4 or 5 minutes long. They've been at it for 20, 25 minutes of just free jamming, right? So pretty cool. They're definitely ending it. There's a slight slowdown in tempo, and then you can hear some subtle string scratching. You can hear Trey going up and down the fretboard, like just adding effects. Trey plays some great guitar in this version, but his approach on the guitar is almost that of not even what you would think of as guitar. He's doing a lot of effects. He's using the instrument in more sort of non-guitar ways, if you will. Just to recap this is a 30-minute jam. Pretty epic, really. It goes all over the place. The music is punctuated by some real ethereal psychedelic beauty that we heard early, and then there's some real dissonant sound experiments. They've got the sound lab right on stage, and you're in the crowd. You're part of this experiment. It's a musical. It's a sonic experiment. So that's what we hear here. It's interesting. They could have chose, instead of using Montana from the November 28th Bozeman version. They could have chose Bozeman for this album. It would have been amazing. Or they could have chose the December 9th, 94 Behemoth, and it would have been great. Because again, those are the 3 tentpole versions. And then from Tweezer, we go right into Simple. And this was another new song from 1994. This one comes from the next night after the You Enjoy Myself, still at Spreckles Theater in San Diego. This one's from December 8th, 1994. Again, it's a new song, hadn't been heard. Mike really funkin' hard. I believe the song's out of the key of F, because I can play it. It's got that anthemic riff, if you will. Many a good night listening to this one. Some of the lyrics are great. We got bebop. The tune actually debuted back on May 27th of 94. It just quickly hit the ground running. It had been, going back to that show that I mentioned earlier, a friend of mine who turned me on to Phish, she had the 12/30/93 show, and versions of Simple in versions of Mike's song in 93 had a second jam, and Simple is in that second jam. They go into F, they go into a second jam in F, and Simple sort of evolved out of that, if you will. But it would be interesting to talk to Mike, and ask him, did he write Simple, as inspired by those jams, or was it something that was completely, because I heard that the original version almost had a bluegrass feel, and I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that it may be on that same From the Archives that I mentioned from 2018 that also has the Simple from 11/16/94. So if you get your hands on that From the Archives, you'll hear that version of Simple, but there may be an early version of Simple with that bluegrassy feel. Then that was recorded for their album Hoist, which was the album that was recorded before this live album. So getting back to this one, I love Trey's line after We Got Bebop. He fires off some riffs, and it's just gets you really pumped up. Mike's, again, sounds really charged. The lyrics, what is a band without skyscrapers? You know, Phish, again, playing in New York, they make it to the Big Apple. Obviously, you think of the Empire State Building and all the skyscrapers there. And, you know, kind of similar to Bouncing Around the Room. I mean, they they're able to sort of fuse their lyrics in and out. And so here we hear Simbop and Beebaphone, Skyballs and Sex Scrapers. Again, just part of them is they have vocal shenanigans, and that's part of their appeal. The crowd loves it. It's just a great version, shorter, compact version, but just great. And then we go into Harryhood, and again, this was another album, another song on the album that hadn't been released on any album hitherto. This version comes from October 23, 1994 in Gainesville, Florida, which was a free show down there. Phish did 4 shows. They kind of dipped around the peninsula. So as they were doing that, they played a show in Gainesville for free. That was at the Gainesville, I believe it's called the Band Shell. It's just sort of a wooden structure, if you will. But the crowd loves it. You can hear the crowd really early on. Trey, again, Trey's playing in this tour. He's playing with these weird effects, and you can hear it here. You can hear Mike's really sort of bombastic reggae lines, which is a signature sound of Harryhood. Where do you go when the lights go out? There's kind of a serene break. I mean, at this point, they'd been playing this song for 9 years. It debuted on October 30th, 1985, playing it for 9 years. And at this point I realized, and I thought this the whole time I was listening to this record, just how great Mike sounds in his performance and the mix here. There's almost sort of a You Enjoy Myself like ascending chord jam. Page's piano turns a little bit darker, and then we hear the "Thank You, Mr. Minor" line. This was inspired by mail that they received. They had a small college apartment near the Harryhood bottling factory in Burlington, and they would get mail from previous tenants, and one of the previous tenants was a Mr. Minor, and so that's where they got that line, "Thank you, Mr. Minor." So I wonder if that Mr. Minor ever made that connection. Probably not. So they're all locked in. Mike is very boppy here, and Trey sounds really stunning, and as they drop into the jam, which has a D, A, G chord progression. Really nice Phish on his ride cymbal. Nice picking by Trey. Subtle Page on the organ. Nice accents by Fishman. Great lines by Phish. This is like Phish bop. I was like, wow, this is like Phish bebop, if you will. Great bass work by Mike. Really trippy piano by Page as well. And Trey's kind of restraining himself a little bit. He's very subtle and active underneath. The jam continues to percolate, and then there's some loud strumming by Trey. You can hear people screaming in the audience. I'm sure they were psyched. There was some really nice sustain by Trey, and everyone's really raging now as Trey starts to build more tension, and they're all responding. Page is trilling. Mike is very punctual on his bass. And then, the jam is sort of quiets, and Trey's kind of fiddling underneath, and then he hits some real bending of the notes, and he starts to play over atop of that previous bass. They finally get back into Hood proper, and then there's a longer tension release cycle, if you will. Mike's still trying to take the reins back more into the tension, and Page as well, and just a really great version. I mean, they chose this for a reason. There's other great versions, but you can definitely feel good about Hood on this version. And I want to dedicate this section of the show to a friend of mine on weekforpod.net, and this particular version and this particular review of Harryhood goes out to my buddy Gainesville. Peace out, Gainesville. Hope you're well. And then the last song on the album, and this is ending set 2, is "The Squirming Coil." And I love this is another Lawn Boy song. So we hear some of the lyrics. "It got away. I love that vocal refrain. I remember harmonizing with some friends of mine in college. We would harmonize some of these lyrics on Squirming Coil. It's a beautiful tune. This one comes from October 9th, 1994. That's the one show out of all these tracks. Like, there's nothing I can... You go and listen to the show, and I'm sure you'll find something amazing, but nothing that jumps out at me like some of the other stuff we've talked about. But this is a great tune. There's some great sustain by Trey early on. And Trey has stated in interviews that Brian May was a big influence on him in this song, especially the notes that he uses. Some nice composed lines before the ascending 2-chord jam, which really is a great highlight of the song. And then we get back into some lyrics after Trey's "Little Jimmy's Off to Camp" line. We hear a nice arpeggio build into "It Got Away Again," and then Trey and Mike are playing along, and Trey's lightly chording. Mike's playing along as well. It's very good, and Fishman even is very subtle on a few toms, just very, very subtle. And then everyone drops out, and it's just Page on the piano. And I just wanted to say, and this probably applies to a lot of Phish fans, that this one tune, with just Page playing his outro piano solo, I mean, it gave me, I always appreciate the piano, but this particular song, it gave me a greater appreciation for piano and piano music. Page, and that's what Page did for me, and I'm sure a lot of Phish fans feel that way, because piano is such a big part of their music. Really, really beautiful stuff, and we hear some beautiful stuff here by Page. He's the chairman of the boards. The crowd's loving it, and he ends the record with, "We all had a great time tonight. Come see us again. Thanks." Just a great way to end the side and the album. And then if you listen subtly, as the music, as the, you're thinking, okay, that's it. And then you can hear like this, it's like you can hear Trey singing, "I saw you," like maybe they mixed in a snippet of a sound check, either from October 9th, 1994, from somewhere, but it's there. It's just them. It's just interesting. Obviously a sound check from somewhere, but it's cool to pick up on that, even though it's very subtle and then quickly fades out. But just to recap, and thanks for hanging in. I know this has been a long review for a very long album, 4 LPs, but this is an incredible album. It really is, and it really is a must-have for Phish fans. I'm sure probably 90% of Phish fans already have it. But if you're a fan of Phish or not a fan of Phish, or if you're a fan of improvisational rock music, this is definitely recommended. This album has a great mix, masterful mixing by Chris Bellman. This recording has great depth, yet it retains the individual qualities of each song's soundstage, because they played all these different venues, and you can hear sort of, it really stuck out to me during Harryhood, knowing that they were playing at the Gainesville, the band shell, if you will. I picked up on that. That they were outside, and there was a synergy there that you could sort of feel in the music. Likewise, same with Bangor. It was a cold, windy night in Bangor, and it was, you could feel that sort of darker energy, the stormy vibes, if you will, in that Tweezer. So all that stuff is very, very present here on this 4 LP set. So just a great job. This release came out in October 27 of 2017. So it's been out for just over 6 years, and there have been some reissues that pop up on Phish.com at their dry goods. There are copies available on Discogs. So if you're inspired by this review, again, I recommend it. It's one of my favorite records. It was such a joy listening to it again last weekend and taking notes. And for me, I'm a huge Phish fan. They're definitely in my top 5 favorite bands of all time. So again, recommend this. I want to thank some folks out there who've subscribed and liked some of my other posts. Thank you for that. And please subscribe and like. And I've got a pretty good record collection. I mean, if there's a record, I'm going to throw this out there for this week. especially, with the holidays coming up. I feel like it's a good time of year to do this for fun and, in good cheer, if you will. If there's a record that you want me to review, a favorite record that you have that I might have, I may not have it in my collection. I don't care if it's Radiohead or, hip hop or jazz, whatever it is. It could be a pop album, whatever it is. Post in the comment section. I'll take a look there, and I'd be more than happy to review something that you'd like to hear me review. So I'm definitely open to that, and so I'm offering that for this week. So please stay tuned for those for that release, and it'll be a special show where I'll announce it and say, "Oh, I picked this record from this person." So definitely, I'm extending that offering to you guys. So thanks for tuning in, and again, do apologize for the delay from last time for the holiday, but more than made up for lost time with this long review. So just like some of Phish's best jams, this was an extended review. But coming in, I kind of figured that would be the case. So at any rate, I hope you've enjoyed this week, and thank you so much for tuning in. Have a great rest of your day. Thanks. Bye.